Served as an assistant women's basketball coach at Taylor University and also coaches Ultimate Frisbee. So we're glad that he's here and preaching to us this morning. Thanks, Nathan. Will you pray with me? Open the eyes of our hearts, God, that we may behold the wonderful things from your word. Amen.
All right. So when I was prepping for this sermon, what I usually do is I take a Tuesday to gather my thoughts, a Wednesday to start putting it together in like a really rough draft, and then Thursday or Friday is when I usually spend writing out that rough draft, and then Sunday morning I really just get down to like rehearsing it and going through it. So I had a couple meetings Thursday, so I was unable to do the write down of the prep, and Friday rained a lot, right? So what you guys don't know is I live in an area right by Store Elementary, and when it rains really fast and hard and doesn't stop, it floods really, really, really bad. As in 4 or 5 cars got stuck in the middle of it. So I was like, well, all of my sermon material's at the church. So I woke up very early this morning trying to scramble thoughts and actually put them on paper so I can say them. But trust me, this passage, I used to be in a worship band that would travel to local churches back where I grew up, and we would speak to the worship bands of the church in a private meeting after or before, and just kind of either speak wisdom or different ideas to them. And this passage was always the one that I spoke about, and the reason being is it's a very powerful one. So know that it's a very heavy text, and we're going to work through it, but it might take longer than usual. But the first question I really ask is, we're talking about service and how to serve, how to engage our community, how to be building the community presence, right? So the question you ask yourself is, why do I need to serve this summer, right? That's the general question you need to ask yourself. Why do I need to do this? Well, I'm not really going to address the why, because every individual service project is going to address that part, right? And I'm not going to really address like why you should go. I'm just going to talk about the importance of an individual going on a project. So I'm not going to address you guys specifically. So when you feel a conviction, I didn't call you out. That's the Holy Spirit saying something, right? That's not me saying, hey, Megan, you need to go do this. That's God saying, hey, this is your nudge. Go do it. And the way I'm going to do this is through stories. And I remember a psychology professor of mine told a lot of boring stories, and I had him for like 3 different classes, and he told the same stories at every class period. So it got old, but what sticks is I remember them, and I remember the concepts. There was another famous teacher who also taught in stories, and his name was Jesus, and he called them parables, right? And so this is the model that I'm going to go through. So if you guys wouldn't mind turning with me to Amos 5, and I'll give you some time to get there because it's in the middle. But Amos here is talking, he's praying with God, and God's talking back, and he's kind of telling Amos instruction for the Israelites. And what he says in 5:21, and God is saying this, he says, I despise your religious feasts. I cannot stand your assemblies. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps, but let justice roll like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. It's heavy. The first word says I hate or I despise. I remember growing up, I was never allowed to say I hate. It's I strongly, strongly dislike this person, right? Because it was wrong to say I hate, right? But he's clearly saying I hate and I despise your religious feasts, your assemblings, your worship, and it's very confusing because the question then I ask is, why is God saying he hates the things that he himself set up to serve and worship him, right? It's ironic. And this Bible I got when, soon after I became a Christian, and what it has on the sides is called a Quest Bible. It has specific questions for text that may be confusing or sometimes interpreted. But what I do when I sermon prep, and I'll walk you through this, is I go immediately to see if there's a question about it. Not necessarily to preach about it, just to get more information about it. But the exact question was, why does God hate religious assemblies he set up? And I'm going to read straight from this, but it says, God set up the customs as a tangible, outward expression to be practiced by his people who wanted to demonstrate their faith and the love they felt for God. Literally an example of how to demonstrate your faith, how, yes, I'm a Christian, I want to do this, right? And then furthermore it says, but many of the Israelites of Amos's day were hypocrites. They attended feasts and offered sacrifices, but their love of God had died out long before. They went to worship to appear respectful, but their hearts had grown cold and empty. Their religion was insincere. It had form, but no substance. It wasn't the customs that God hated, it was the hypocrisy. And I read that, and I immediately think, wow, that sounds all too familiar of what era we're in right now. It's hard to really grasp the concept, but we're in a world today that is much more about image than it is about action. We're in a world today where people go just to go rather than to get something from it. And so this pointed me, in my head I was thinking this form of godliness, and 2 Timothy talks about this, and when Paul's writing to Timothy, he's telling him to beware of certain people. He's been around, Paul has, and he obviously was not a Christian his whole life, and he knows what kind of people are traps, right? And he says to Timothy, says, but mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Right there, I know that was a long list, but let's reflect. Something probably stuck out and you're like, oh, that sounds familiar. Maybe to your specific example, maybe to somebody you know, maybe to something you've heard in the news, but it sounds familiar, right? And then at the end he says, they have a form of godliness, but they deny its power. And then Paul blatantly says, have nothing to do with them. And that's very strong words. And then this form of godliness, I think, because I didn't grow up a Christian, and so I was very keen to the hot, cold, lukewarm analogy. And I know Revelation's like a book that has its own little diary lock that we don't open all the time. But if we go to just that passage in Revelation 3, where it says, I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. You say, I am rich, I have acquired wealth, and do not need a thing, but you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, personally. I understand the cold, hot, lukewarm analogy, but again, I'm not in a situation where cold, hot, and lukewarm mean a lot to me, personally. But when John was writing this, it meant a whole lot more to him. And this isn't necessarily 100% accurate, but this is something John could have been alluding to, so know that this is a could have, not a fact. But John could have been alluding to the water springs that they come up around in Israel. And there's 3 types of springs you can run up. You can have a cold spring, which is good for replenishing, refreshing. You can drink from it. It's going to give you life, really, out in the desert. You can come across a hot spring, which is used for hygiene or health. Or you can come across a hot spring that is now cooled off and now it's lukewarm. There is no use for a lukewarm spring. And so when they would touch it, they would instantly get that feeling of frustration, of disappointment, because lukewarm's nothing but a disappointment to them. Does that make sense? To where it doesn't mean a lot to us because we can turn on a hot faucet or a cold faucet and we get exactly what we need. But back then they had to go search this stuff out. They couldn't just turn on the faucet. So, and I was thinking, and as I was writing the sermon, I look at my desk and I have a bottle of water that has probably been sitting there for a month. Unopened, but it's not cold or hot. I have no use for it. If it was hot, it'd be coffee. If it was cold, I'd be drinking it. It's just been sitting in my office, and it's still there. And I was like, this is exactly what God's thinking. He knows that these people have enough godliness to think they're okay. just enough to move forward and just enough to call them Christians. But God doesn't really desire just enough. He desires wholehearted, genuine eagerness for him. So when we think back to Amos 5, these Israelites were doing just enough to call themselves Jews back then, but really in our culture, we're doing just enough. We're going to church, we're sitting in the pew, we're standing up for worship, we're praying, we're doing just enough, but we don't have it in our heart, right? So we think when talking summer service, again, I'm not going to necessarily dive into the why you should go, but more of the importance of an individual. And again, like I said, I'm going to do this through a couple stories. This first one, know that it's a made-up story, and you'll figure that out. But the other ones are real, and I've been a part of. But, so when we're thinking service, what's worse than being sick? Because when you're sick, you can't go out and serve. You've got to stay home, you got to get healthy. What's worse than being sick? Not dead. I understand that would be worse than being sick. But what's worse than being sick is discouraged, because you have the ability to go out, but you don't have the want. Does that make sense? So I'm going to tell a couple stories about discouragement. This man was in a city very similar to Chicago. He'd been a prominent businessman, started his own business, found his faith in college, served with his campus ministry, was able to help give to the crusaders, if you will, help give to the people that taught him. He opened up a homeless shelter. He was able to provide staff for that homeless shelter because of the money he made. He's able to help jumpstart businesses. A lot of times when business start, they need someone to help them to have an office for a little bit, and he was able to do that for businesses. And then he intentionally, every time he'd go to and from work, he intentionally placed himself in an apartment complex where a lot of crime happened. Now, he was single, so he could do this, but he intentionally did that so on his walk to work, he would be able to pray and talk to the people on the street, or his neighbors. He did this intentionally so that he could be a service to them. This guy, is the epitome of someone who loves God and wants to do his mission, right? This is something that, I would strive to be. And he built this team of supporters around him, of Christian supporters who shared his mission. But if they share that mission of going out and serving, what are they going to do? They're going to go out and do the same thing somewhere else. And his close-knit team of supporters left. Not all at once, but they left over time. And what he failed at was building another team back up, so he's left alone. So some of his passion left with him. When you have a team like that and they leave, some of the passion leaves. He found himself more into his work than into God. And I think that happens a lot. I don't know if you guys can relate, but sometimes you go to work, come back, laying in bed, you're like, man, I spent no time with God. Or worse, you just completely forget. And then a week goes by, Sunday morning comes around, you're like, oh, I need to go to church. I haven't done church at all this week, right? And church is more than just a Sunday morning. So this guy started doing more work and less serving, right? And so months and months go by, and then he finally gets discouraged. Gets down on himself. He's frustrated. He has zero motivation. He gets burnt out. His business isn't doing well. He doesn't go to work anymore. He realizes now he's bankrupt. Now he has no money. He can't support the things he wants to support. And he gets pretty frustrated, and now he's at the point where he wants to end his life. A drastic turn of events, but this does happen. So he's at this point where he wants to end his life, right? So he decides he's gonna walk to a bridge and jump. As he's walking, he's passing the people on the street that he knows, and they're like, hey, and he's discouraged. He's walking, he's ignoring, right? Discouragement, worse than being sick. He's passing the homeless shelter that he himself built. He's passing the multiple businesses he helped jumpstart. So this guy, he steps up on this ledge, ready to jump. And, God and the angels are talking, and the angel's like, God, this guy is so much more value to us alive than he is dead. Let me go save him. And God's like, well, if you try to go grab him, he's gonna freak out and fall. He's like, the angel's like, I have an idea. So the angel kind of played the service card, and the angel, instead of going out onto the bridge with the guy, he actually jumped into the water and appeared to be drowning. So when the guy's looking over at the edge, he sees someone drowning. He's like, oh no. So he jumps off the edge, runs around, saves the guy drowning, pulls him out. They're talking to each other, just, warming up. The water was cold probably. Lake Michigan's not warm. And then the guy says to the angel, he's like, man, you're lucky I was there. I saved your life. And the angel looks, no, I saved your life. It's like, no, you didn't save, I saw you down there. He's like, well, you were the one about to jump. He's like, no, I was standing. I was getting a better breeze. He's like, no, I'm an angel. I saw you. I saw your discouragement. I saw what you're doing. He's like, I know that I actually saved your life. And the guy's still discouraged. He's happy that he saved him, but still discouraged. He's like, and he says the worst phrase that any person can say. He's just like, I wish that I've never been born. I wouldn't have to go through this. I'm going to pause the story here. I know we're at a climactic part. I'm pausing it here. And I'm going to talk about a couple personal stories in between. So my discipler, David Kroll, we're going to go on a mission trip to Panama City Beach, the place I met Megan. But to get him there, me and my roommate had to beg him. We actually paid him to go to this mission trip. And he's the guy mentoring me. And the reason he didn't want to go is he wanted to spend time with his family who'd been gone on a mission trip across seas. So he had a legitimate excuse. It's not like he just wasn't going. But we paid him like $100 to go, right? So he goes. The first day, David comes back, and we're about to have a men's group. And he is visibly frustrated. And I've never really seen him angry, but he's mad. And he's like, I don't understand why I'm going on mission trips and trying to talk to people about God and sharing the gospel, and I can never see someone come to Christ. And it was making him so frustrated because everybody he's talked to either knew God, didn't want anything to do with him, or just listened and moved on. He wanted to find somebody at a point ready to change their life, and he couldn't. And so the men group leader challenged David and said, you need to spend the next day doing nothing but finding your eagerness and finding the passion, because it's not about someone getting saved. It's about moving someone from a spot of maybe not being a Christian to considering it. It's about just moving someone to the next step. And if they're at that decision, great. But a lot of people aren't. And so David spent the next day replenishing, getting excited to do exactly what God called, and that's just to love. So the next day, the day after, David gets replenished, comes around, and we all travel in a huge van. We all pummel out, and it's like we storm the beach of a bunch of college students who are not necessarily sober. So me and two girls are going out on a team, and him and my buddy are going out on a team, and we start walking together, and we're about to separate because you don't want to go in a big group. We're about to separate, and we see a guy who's got his shirt off, swim trunks, carrying a bottle, stumbling. And since I've got two ladies with me, I was like, let's go talk to the two girls reading on the chairs and let the guys talk to the guy. That just seemed more logical to me. So I see David go approach the guy. They're talking. We go approach the girls, but really it's like the four girls talking, and I'm just standing there. I'm just the resources carrying the backpack at this point. But I start to pray, and I've never told this story, but I start to pray for David in a sense of, God, let him do what he's supposed to do rather than him having expectation and not meeting that expectation. Let him do your work for your purpose. I didn't know what come of it. I didn't ask him about it. They were still talking as we left. And at the end of this, it's a big group, about, say, 2,000 people or so. We're in the conference center after, and they always come up and share stories about good things that happened. And I see David going up there. I was like, oh, great, David finally got a good story. About time he's not coming back mad. However, I see David up there at the beginning, and like 30 minutes go by, and he is still not shared with. And I was like, what's going on? And I know they usually save the better stories for last, right? So finally they say, and then the guy says it just like this. He's like, and the best story of them all, brings David up, ushers him up, and this is the story that David shared. He said, we met a guy who had just got expelled from college, expelled from Michigan University for miscellaneous reasons. He came to Panama City Beach with the intent to drink his life away, with the intent of not returning to Michigan. And David met him at a point where he had no hope, he was discouraged, and didn't want to continue on. And David and my roommate were actually able to watch him give his life over to Christ and watch him become encouraged and have hope. And that's where the story ends, but we don't know what came of it, right? We don't know. He might have went and started his own mission trip. He might have went back and done something great. He might have ran with it, went home, and felt a little bit better. We don't know. All we know is at that point he was encouraged. Does that make sense? So we move forward, and we think back to the Amos passage. If David would have went out and had zero eagerness or not been genuine in the things he was doing, would that have made a change in that person's life? Probably not. If he would have done it just to do it, probably wouldn't have made a change. Or if David would have sat in his frustration of not being able to watch someone come to Christ, he wouldn't have had that opportunity. Are we going to be humble enough to pray for somebody that might be frustrated and discouraged? You never know. So furthermore, we go through that year together, and how many, I don't see many, but how many people are like 19 to 22 in this room? Anybody? Got one. Okay. How many parents have raised a 19 to 20-year-old before? Great, much more hands. Okay, so if your kid at 19 to 20 years old were to come to you and say, hey, I'm going to go on a trip all over the East Coast of the U.S. It's going to be like 3 weeks. It's going to be fine. Your immediate question is like, okay, who are you going with? Oh, just me and like 3 or 4 other friends. And then your next question, no adults? No, it's going to be fine. We're going to stay in hotels. We're going to minister to homeless people. It's totally fine. What's your response? Probably not, right? So this is exactly what happened. So my roommate and I developed a passion for homeless individuals. The trip was to go to New York, Washington, D.C., New Orleans, and St. Louis, ministering to homeless people for 3 weeks. And lovely in-laws were a part of that conversation of, hey, it's going to be fine. You're just going to have to trust us, right? But it's intimidating because we're taking a van that leaks gasoline and has a hole in the side of it, trying to make it across the U.S. But so we start this trip, and I know that I needed to serve. I know that I needed to serve somehow. I know that God called me to serve. I didn't know where. And that was really frustrating me because the ministry that I was in was all about going on a summer mission trip, trying to stay engaged, trying to have Bible studies. And I wanted to, I just didn't have a passion. And you have to have a passion when you go on something similar to David, similar to what Amos is talking about. So I know I needed to serve, and I finally felt a call to go to the homeless people. And then when I started asking friends and family to not go with me, but just to support me and to say that's a good idea, and they all said that it was a bad idea and that we shouldn't do it and that it's going to cost too much money and that it's going to fail, that's when I became discouraged, right? Because you expect when you talk to your family that they're going to say something along the lines of like, I really don't want you to go, but I'm going to support you, right? I mean, you'd expect your family to do that, but sometimes they didn't. And I remember staying super prayerful with my roommate at the time, just talking about it because he's in the same boat. So 2 weeks before the trip, we had all the support raised. So everything was going to be fully funded. We had 2 options for vehicles, mind you. I was, savvy. I was a 20-year-old thinking one might back out. Let's have a backup plan. 2 weeks before, I get a call like Monday, 1 vehicle backed out. I was like, okay, great. That's fine. Like, we've got a backup plan. Tuesday comes around, that one cancels. I was like, okay, I don't have plan C because we can't rent vehicles. We were too young, right? We only had one 21-year-old, and he wasn't going to be 21 until like 3 days on the trip. So we couldn't rent a van at the time. So I call up my friends, and it didn't affect our prayers. We were frustrated, but we knew it was going to work out. I call up my friends, and they're like, hey, we have a van you could use. They're like, I don't know if it'll make it, but you can use it for free. And when I say this van, you don't know if it's going to make it, literally has a hole in the side. The roof fell on our heads. It leaked gasoline. It was a hot mess, but it made it all 3,500 miles, and we were able to, with the extra support, give them money for an oil change or a new car or something. But what the point of that story is it wasn't about who we served. It was about we didn't have a calling, and we found one. We found a passion, and then we exploited that passion. We went on it, right? We had to go and do it. We had setbacks because Satan tries to step in and get in the way and tries to make sure that you feel a little bit discouraged from time in, time out. And you've got to find the prayer, and you've got to find somebody who's willing to support you with it. So if we reread Amos 5, it says, I despise your religious feasts. I cannot stand your assemblies. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps, but let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. So, what would have happened if David only had a form of godliness? That guy from Michigan probably wouldn't be changed. What happens if the 6 who went on that mission trip only had a form of godliness? Probably wouldn't have went for one. For sure wouldn't have been able to raise the support. And after the 2 vans backed out on us, probably would have canceled, just like everybody was telling us to, right? Satan would have won. He would have won that fight. God heard our prayers and answered our needs exactly how we needed it. No more, no less. So you have to be willing to take a step to do the service. You have to be willing to do the service because it's going to set you, and I say free, I mean spiritually free. And the reason I say that is we're going to go back to the story of the discouraged guy. And so we're talking the discouraged man, and he just got done saying, I wish I was never born. And the angel says, okay, which is strange. So big bang, some stars go flying, and they're still sitting in the same room, but the angel's like, let me show you the town. So they start walking. They pass street gangs. They pass nightclubs that the homeless shelter used to be. They pass abandoned churches that guy helped set up. They pass people doing illegal activity on the streets. And he's like, it wasn't what you directly set up. It's what you did for somebody that did for somebody else. He's like, it was your fingerprints that made a difference. He's like, you made a difference in yourself, but you impact more than just your direct people. Right? And so that's the important of a you for service. It's not the people that you're directly influencing, it's who they are going to go influence. If you've seen the movie Pay It Forward, it's the same concept. You're going to pay forward that service. And then furthermore with service, we think it's a little bit uncomfortable. And it is. It's a little bit scary to go do. I guess it's a little scary to sign up and commit to something. But one day I was doing dishes, which is rare, but I was doing dishes and I heard this screech from my new puppy, like a loud screech, like one of those like I need to go right now. And the way our kennel is, and I'll turn to the side, the way our kennel is, it locks like this. Okay, so he can't get out. Like if he pushes the door, he can't get out, right? His collar that I know I'm not supposed to have on when he's in the kennel. I got it. I fixed that part now. His collar was on, and he got it hooked up and through here. And he can't pull it off because it would require him to have to get really close to something that he's uncomfortable with. The more he pulled, the more it was choking him. Does that make sense? In an effort to get free, he started to spin, which makes that collar a whole heck of a lot tighter. So I immediately go there, right? I look, I'm like, oh, this can be easy. Let me just open the kennel and that it's going to fall right off. I lift the door, which lifts the dog, who's now choking more, freaking out, and he's still trying to spin. And so I have to like wedge my hands into these little crevices. Finally, I get him loose, open the kennel. Now he's, all cuddly with me, which he never is. He squirms all the time, but he's cuddly, calms down. But the moral of that story is sometimes you got to get a little bit closer to the uncomfortable to be comfortable, right? And that's really going to set you free. And when I think of that, that's a perfect illustration of God. And I talked about that last time I preached. Sometimes you just have to let God work. You have to be uncomfortable, and that's going to set you totally spiritually free. Now, it's not always as drastic as being discouraged and wanting to end your life, but I think we've all been a point of being discouraged and being frustrated with ministry. I think we've all had a point where we wanted to sit down and just pray, and I would encourage you to do just that. So I'm gonna have some closing questions, but when we see these things and we see the service projects, there's a couple things that can run through our head. One, you may know that you're called. Okay, but you don't know where to go. One, you've got to pray. That's the first thing you have to do. The second is you have to seek. And by seek, I don't mean like, hey, Megan, did you hear what service projects were going around? No, I didn't. Okay, that's it. No, I mean like actually go find service projects that you can do. They've got a list of them for you guys to do this summer. Wes, Molly, they're everywhere. You guys sign up for those and be called to do it. So you pray, you seek it out earnestly, and you'll find the one you want to do. The second is you may know that you should be serving, but you have zero eagerness. And I may be just speaking, but I think it would be more detrimental to you and the people you're serving if you went and had zero passion for serving. But I would encourage you, dive yourself into Matthew 25:40 when it talks about doing everything for the least of these, or even the Great Commission in Matthew 28. Dive into those, study them, really understand what Jesus' commands are, specifically with loving people, because there's no denying what he wants you to do. And it's serving others, it's loving people, right? And then once you read that and dive into it, you're going to have a passion. And then the next question, and I've asked myself this, is my serving genuine? Is my serving like Amos's day, or is my serving actually genuine, wholehearted eagerness? And that's a daily question I think you should ask yourself. You should reflect on it in the morning, prepping for the day, and at night. Did I really genuinely serve? That's all prayer with God. And he'll answer it in different ways, but that's all prayer. And as I invite the band back up, you're in one of four spots, realistically. You're either not serving and you have no passion. So the next step is you got to find the passion first. And then you got to go seek and find the service project. The second is you're either not serving, but you feel called to serve. Go find it. Go find it. Or you're serving with no passion, so you just need to spend some time in Jesus' commands. Or you're serving with passion. Great, your job's not done. You've got to go spur on the others who feel very discouraged. That's the hardest part. Once you're serving and you have passion and you think, great, I've come to the end. Nope, you're still at work. You still got to spur on those who are discouraged, because there's plenty of people who are constantly discouraged day in, day out. We can't settle with being comfortable, right? We have to step into the uncomfortable and make the uncomfortable comfortable. Let me pray to end this. God, we thank you for the time. We thank you that you're merciful, that you have patience with us. We pray that you give us passion and give us the service opportunity that we can find pleasing to us, but also one that we can do with genuine, wholehearted eagerness. In your name we pray. Amen.